My wife came from old money and cheated on me with an artist who looked down on my success. She thought I was just a workhorse. So I hired him, made him my star employee, and then tore down their affair in front of everyone who mattered. There's a certain kind of satisfaction that comes from standing atop something you built with your own two hands, looking down at a city you've helped shape. From the rooftop of the apex, my firm's latest skyscraper, the city of Chicago spreads out like a circuit board, humming with a million lives, a million stories. I'm an architect. I deal in structure, in foundations, in the raw physics of stress and support. I understand that the most colossal tower can be compromised by a single, unnoticed flaw in its base. For 15 years, I thought the foundation of my own life, my marriage to Eleanor, was bedrock. I was wrong. The flaw was there. I just hadn't been looking for it. The memory that always surfaces first is from about a year ago. We were at her parents' estate in Lake Forest for their anniversary, a place so steeped in old money it felt like the air itself was inherited. The dinner was a pageant of quiet condescension. Her father, Mr. Abernathy, a man who ran his inherited investment firm with the same languid entitlement he ran his life, raised a crystal glass of ridiculously expensive Bordeaux. He fixed his gaze on me across the mahogany expanse of the dining table. To Arthur, he'd said, his voice smooth as velvet, "It's truly remarkable what one can achieve with sheer force of will and good concrete." The table offered a polite titter of laughter. I saw Eleanor force a smile, a brief, tight flicker of her lips. She gave me a little shrug, a gesture that was supposed to say, "Oh, Dad." But I knew what it really said. This is the price of admission. I felt the familiar sting of being the outsider, the builder in a room of buyers, the new money staining their antique rug. I'd built an empire of steel and glass, a testament to grit and vision, but in their world, I would always be the man who worked with his hands. That feeling, that quiet dismissal, had been a constant hum beneath the surface of our marriage. I told myself it didn't matter. I loved Eleanor, and I had built a world for us that was safe, luxurious, and undeniable. I had provided. I had constructed our life with the same meticulous care I used to design a skyscraper. But structures, I know better than anyone, can hold a secret weakness. The revelation didn't come with a bang. It came late on a Tuesday night, alone in my home office, a vast, minimalist space that Eleanor had designed to be featured in a magazine. It was all white oak and shadows. I was doing the monthly review of our joint American Express statement, a routine task I handled because Eleanor found finances unutterably drab. My eyes scanned the columns of figures. Charity galas, high-end department stores, the usual topography of our life. Then, a line item stopped my heart. Croft Gallery. Consultation and private acquisition. The amount was $25,000. My mind raced. I knew the Croft Gallery. It was owned by Julian Croft, a pretentious, critically acclaimed artist whose work Eleanor adored and I found emotionally vacant. He was everything I wasn't. Soft, esoteric, born into a world of abstract ideas rather than concrete realities. I pulled up Eleanor's digital calendar for that day. It was 3 weeks ago. The entry read, 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Charity board meeting, Children's Literacy Fund. I sat back, the leather of my Eames chair groaning in the silence of the house. It wasn't the money. $25,000 was a rounding error. It was the lie. It was so clean, so precise, so structural. It wasn't a panicked, messy lie. It was an architected deception, a hairline crack. And as I stared at the screen, I felt it splinter silently, fatally, across the entire foundation of my life. My first reaction wasn't the hot rage you see in movies. It was a profound, hollowing shock, a sudden, silent evacuation of all feeling, leaving behind a cold, cavernous space. I closed the laptop. The house, usually a symbol of my success, felt like a mausoleum. I walked out, leaving my keys on the marble countertop, and drove. I had no destination. I just let the automated systems of my Tesla guide me through the sleeping city, a ghost in my own machine. Eventually, I found myself parked outside the security gates of the Apex construction site. It was 2 a.m. I badged myself in. The night watchman, a stout man named Sal, gave me a surprised look, but knew better than to ask questions. I took the rickety construction elevator to the 78th floor, the highest completed level. Up there, it was a world of raw potential. Rebar sprouted from the concrete like metallic weeds. Electrical conduits snaked across the floor, waiting to be given life. The wind, raw and cold off Lake Michigan, whipped through the unfinished walls, a mournful, whistling song. I stood there in my $1,000 suit and handmade Italian shoes, amidst the dirt, the dust, and the elemental power of creation. And for the first time in a decade, I let the facade of Arthur Vance, founder and CEO, crumble into dust. I wasn't a titan of industry. I was just a man, standing on a skeleton of his own making, feeling his own world fall apart. The cold air bit at my cheeks, and it was in that biting wind that a memory, unbidden, ambushed me. It wasn't a memory of our grand wedding or the day we bought this house. It was from 15 years ago. We were living in a cramped, one-bedroom apartment in Wicker Park. I was sketching on the floor, plans for my very first solo project spread out around me. The fee for that project would barely cover rent for 3 months. Eleanor, her hair still wet from the shower, knelt beside me on the worn hardwood floor. She wasn't the polished, untouchable woman from the charity balls. She was just a girl in love with a boy with a crazy dream. She traced the lines of my drawing with her finger, her touch gentle. "I don't care what they think, Art," she had whispered, her voice full of a fierce belief that it felt like the strongest material in the world. "You don't just build buildings. You build worlds." That was the memory that broke me. Not the lie about the art gallery. Not the condescension of her father. It was the memory of her faith. The sudden, gut-wrenching realization that the woman who had said those words was gone, replaced by a stranger who would lie so casually. The betrayal wasn't just in the present. It was a retroactive demolition of our past. I leaned against a cold concrete pillar, the rough surface pressing into my back, and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for 15 years. It was a quiet, ragged sound, swallowed by the wind. And in that moment of absolute brokenness, something new began to form. The grief, the shock, the heartbreak, it didn't vanish. It calcified. It hardened into something cold, dense, and structural. The builder in me, the architect, took over from the husband. Grief is a chaotic force. It tears things down. But I don't tear things down. I build. And sometimes, to build something new, you first have to design a controlled demolition of the old. By the time the sun began to cast a pale, gray light over the lake, I knew what I had to do. I walked back to the elevator, my face set. The pain was still there, a hot core in my chest, but it was now fuel. I wasn't just going to get a divorce. I was going to take back the blueprint. The next morning, I called my lawyer. I didn't want his counsel on reconciliation. I asked for the name of the best private investigator he knew. "Not a divorce guy who peeks in windows, Mark," I said, my voice flat. "I want someone who understands data, finances, digital footprints. Someone who can get me a complete schematic." He gave me a name, a man named Peterson, ex-military intelligence. I met him in a sterile, anonymous coffee shop. He was a quiet, unassuming man in his 50s with eyes that missed nothing. I gave him a name, Julian Croft, and a credit card number. I told him I wanted everything. Not just proof of an affair, but a psychological and financial profile. I wanted to know his weaknesses, his ambitions, his vanities. Peterson just nodded, took my retainer, and said he'd be in touch. While Peterson worked, I began my own research. Julian Croft's online presence was a monument to his ego. His gallery's website was full of pretentious artist statements about interrogating the dialectic between form and void. His personal social media was a curated gallery of him at gallery openings, wearing expensive scarves and looking thoughtfully at things. He was a caricature of the art world parasite. But as I dug deeper, I found articles praising his uncanny eye for talent and his singular vision. He was arrogant, but he wasn't a fraud. And more importantly, I found a trade journal interview where he lamented the financial precarity of the art world. To be a true patron, he'd said, one needs stability. It is the great irony that to support art, one must often step away from it. He was looking for a bigger, more stable platform for his ego. A week later, Peterson delivered a slim, encrypted flash drive. The contents were clinical and devastating. Photos of Eleanor and Julian entering a boutique hotel in the Gold Coast. Receipts for gifts he'd bought her, jewelry, first edition books, all charged her a supplementary card on my account. And the texts. I read them in the cold, blue light of my monitor. Her complaints about my obsession with work. His replies, full of poetic flattery. And then, the line that felt like a drill boring into my skull. Eleanor, he's a good man, I suppose. But there's no soul. Julian, he just builds things. Julian, leave the builder to his bricks, my dear. Some people are meant to build cages, even gilded ones. Others are meant to set spirits free. Builder. The same casual dismissal her father used. A cage. That's what my life's work was to her. Not a world. A cage. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark. The plan, which had been a rough sketch, now came into sharp focus. My rage was a forge, and in it, I was crafting a key. If Julian Croft wanted a stable platform for his grand vision, I would build it for him. I would build him the most beautiful, gilded cage he had ever seen. And then I would lock the door. The first step in building a trap is to design the perfect bait. The next morning, I called a meeting with Sophia Rossi. Sophia was my vice president of design, a razor-sharp woman in her 50s who had been with me since the beginning. She was more than an employee. She was a partner in creation, the one person who understood my architectural language without needing a translator. Sophia, I said, leaning back in my chair, I'm creating a new role, a C-suite position, director of aesthetic vision. Sophia, ever perceptive, raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. She didn't say anything, just waited. I want someone to act as a bridge. I continued, my voice even. A liaison between our structural work and the world of fine art, culture, luxury branding. I want our firm to be seen not just as builders, but as cultural curators. Make the job description sound like it was written by the poet laureate. The salary should be obscene. The perks should be magnificent. She studied my face for a long moment, her dark eyes analytical. An interesting strategic pivot, Arthur. A very expensive one. Any particular vision you have in mind for this candidate? I met her gaze, letting her see a flicker of the cold fire burning behind my own. Just find me the best, I said quietly. Someone who thinks they're better than all of us. She nodded slowly, a silent understanding passing between us. Sophia knew me. She knew that I never made a move without a reason, that every line I drew on a blueprint had a purpose. She didn't need to know the whole schematic yet. She just needed to execute her part of the plan flawlessly. Within a week, the job was posted on every high-level executive recruitment site. As expected, Julian Croft's application arrived. His cover letter was a masterpiece of self-aggrandizement, a purple prose screed about his desire to imbue the sterile landscape of modern architecture with narrative soul. It was nauseating. It was perfect. He sailed through the initial interviews. My HR team was dazzled by his charisma. My design heads were impressed by his articulate, if impractical, ideas. For the final interview, I arranged for the panel to be held in our main glass-wall boardroom. I would be watching from my office via a live camera feed. I sat in the dark, watching the monitor like a predator studying its prey. Julian walked in, dressed in a ridiculously expensive Italian suit that was just a little too fashionable for a corporate environment. He radiated a confidence that bordered on smugness. He spoke with a smooth, practiced charm, his hands gesturing gracefully as he spoke of Kandinsky and the emotional resonance of color. But I wasn't listening to his words. I was studying him. I saw the flash of disdain in his eyes when the head of engineering brought up budget constraints. I noted the way he subtly patronized the female HR director, calling her my dear at one point. I saw the raw, naked ambition when Sophia mentioned the role came with a car service and a seat on the company's creative board. He wasn't just a lover. He was a social climber, a parasite looking for a bigger host. And he saw my company, my life's work, as his next meal. After he left, Sophia came into my office, closing the door behind her. He's an arrogant prick, Arthur, she said, her voice blunt. He thinks building codes are a suggestion. but she conceded he's brilliant. The board would love him. He's a PR dream. I looked at the frozen image of Julian's smiling face on the screen. A PR dream. A beautiful Trojan horse, waiting to be wheeled inside the gates. I know, I said, my voice quiet. Brilliance can be aimed, Sophia. Offer him the job. Give him 20% more than he asked for. I want him to feel like he's won the lottery. She nodded, her expression grim but resolute. Okay, Arthur. The horse is at the gates. Julian accepted the offer with an alacrity that confirmed my assessment of his desperation. His email was a parody of humble gratitude, which I imagined he typed while simultaneously planning how to redecorate his new corner office. And what an office it was. I had Sophia assign him the suite on the 80th floor with a panoramic view of the lake, furnished with vintage pieces that cost more than my first condo. I gave him a lavish budget, an executive assistant, and a title that got him a table at any restaurant in the city. I was building his cage, and I was making sure the bars were gilded. His first month was a whirlwind of introductions and strategy meetings where he pontificated about disrupting the architectural paradigm. He was insufferable. He was also, to my cold satisfaction, completely oblivious. To him, I was Arthur Vance, his new, slightly boring, but incredibly generous boss. The idea that I could be the husband of his mistress was so far outside his realm of narcissistic possibility that it didn't even register. Then, it was time to give him his first major assignment. I called him into my office. He sank into one of the leather armchairs, looking perfectly at home. Julian, I began, my tone serious and confidential. I have a project for you. Something special. It requires a unique touch, a level of sophistication that, frankly, no one else here possesses. I saw his ego inflate, his posture straightening. I'm intrigued, Arthur. The Abernathy Foundation is building a new pavilion for the Museum of Contemporary Art, I said, watching his face carefully. It's a philanthropic endeavor. My father-in-law is on the board. I let that hang in the air. Mentioning my connection to the Abernathy name was a deliberate move, designed to make the project seem both prestigious and personal to me. It's a passion project, I lied. The budget is flexible, but the client is a committee of strong personalities. They need a visionary to guide them, someone who can handle delicate egos and produce something truly world-class. Say no more, Julian said, a greedy light in his eyes. It sounds like a perfect fit. He had no idea. The Abernathy Pavilion was a notorious project within the firm. We've been trying to get it off the ground for years. The committee was a snake pit of my wife's mother's friends, each with a different, terrible idea. It was a logistical and aesthetic nightmare, a project designed by committee and destined for failure. It was the perfect quagmire to drown him in. The trap was set. Now I began to tighten the screws. I scheduled mandatory 7 a.m. site visits. I arranged late-night, emergency brainstorming sessions that were really just me and a few senior architects grilling him on structural practicalities he didn't understand. I buried him in paperwork, in zoning variances, in engineering reports. His life became a blur of meetings and deadlines. His weekends vanished. His evenings were consumed. And all the while, I continued to monitor his communications. The PI had given me a method. It wasn't savory, but neither was what they had done. The text to Eleanor became shorter, more strained. Julian, swamped tonight. This Abernathy thing is a beast. Eleanor, again? I was hoping we could see that new exhibit. Julian can't. Vance is driving this thing like a slave ship. One evening, I found him in the communal kitchen, looking exhausted as he poured his third coffee of the night. I leaned against the counter, feigning camaraderie. Burning the midnight oil, I said. He managed a weak smile. This pavilion project is demanding. Tell me about it. I sighed, pouring myself a coffee I didn't want. My wife has been on my case about me working too much. Says a man needs balance. That I'll burn out. I took a sip, studying him over the rim of the cup. You seeing anyone, Julian? Don't make the same mistake I did. Neglect the home front, and you'll find a foundation has cracked when you aren't looking. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, unease, recognition, maybe even a sliver of guilt. He just muttered something about it being complicated and quickly retreated back to his gilded cage. It was working. I wasn't just consuming his time. I was beginning to consume his mind. I was a ghost in his affair, a constant low-level hum of pressure that was slowly, methodically driving a wedge between them. After a month of the pavilion grind, Julian was showing signs of wear. The strain was evident in the dark circles under his eyes and the increasingly frequent, frustrated texts he exchanged with Eleanor. They were arguing more, their clandestine meetings becoming rarer and more fraught. This was the moment to escalate. I needed to move from applying pressure to engineering a fracture. The opportunity arrived in the form of Archex Chicago, the biggest architectural expo in the Midwest. It was a major event for the industry. It was also, as Peterson's continued surveillance informed me, the event Julian and Eleanor had chosen for a weekend-long rendezvous. They had booked a suite at the Langham, a place known for its discreet luxury. They planned to mix the illicit thrill of their affair with the legitimate cover of a professional conference. The plan they'd made was careless, arrogant. They assumed they were moving in separate worlds that would never intersect. They were about to learn that I was the architect of both. The day before the conference began, a Thursday, I scheduled an emergency 10 a.m. meeting. The subject, critical review, Abernathy Pavilion. I made attendance mandatory for all key personnel on the project, with Julian, of course, at the head of the table. The atmosphere in the boardroom was tense. I had my finance director present a report, which I had instructed him to frame in the most alarming way possible, showing potential budget overruns and a timeline that was slipping into the red. "This is unacceptable," I said, my voice sharp and laced with disappointment. I looked directly at Julian. "The committee is getting nervous. Mrs. Abernathy called me personally this morning. She's threatening to pull the plug." This was a lie, of course. My mother-in-law rarely called me for any reason other than to remind me of Eleanor's birthday. Julian went pale. This project was his showpiece, the foundation of his new, powerful identity. The idea of it failing was a direct threat to his ego. I can fix this, Arthur," he stammered. "We can work through the weekend, get the schematics back on track." "The weekend?" I said, feigning surprise. "But the Archex conference is this weekend. I assumed you were our firm's lead representative there." He was trapped. He couldn't admit he was going for a tryst. "The project is more important," he said, trying to sound noble. I let the silence hang for a beat, letting him commit. Then, I delivered the checkmate. "No," I said decisively, standing up. "You're right. The project is paramount." I looked around the table. "Everyone, I want a full diagnostic on my desk by Monday morning. I expect you all to put in the hours this weekend to make it happen." I then turned to Sophia. "Sophia, you'll lead this. You have my full authority. I'll be out of touch." I paused, then looked at my watch. "I'm heading to the airport. I've decided to go to Chicago myself. If the Abernathy name is on the line, then Vance needs to be there to handle the donors personally. It's a last-minute thing, but it has to be done." The room was silent. Julian's face was a mask of disbelief and horror. He was stuck here, in a boardroom, while I was flying to the very city where he had planned his romantic getaway. I went home to pack a small overnight bag. Eleanor was in the bedroom, laying out a dress. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice a little too casual. "Work trip, honey," I said, pulling a suit from the closet. "Chicago. Something's come up with your father's pavilion project. I have to go put out a fire." I didn't look at her, but I could feel her eyes on me. I could feel the silent, frantic calculations happening in her mind. The color drained from her face. She knew. Not that I knew, but she knew her perfectly planned weekend had just been demolished. And for the first time, she had no one to blame but the man she was betraying. The Chicago gambit worked better than I could have hoped. The weekend of forced labor drove a deep wedge between Julian and Eleanor. Their texts were a storm of accusations and apologies. He accused her of not understanding the pressure he was under. She accused him of prioritizing work over her. It was beautifully, poetically ironic. He was now living the very life she claimed to have fled from with me. The foundation of their affair, built on the flimsy ground of shared complaint, was beginning to crack under real-world stress. But doubt wasn't enough. I needed to introduce a more corrosive element: fear. I needed Julian to understand that his entanglement with Eleanor wasn't a secret, romantic rebellion, but a dangerous miscalculation in a world of power he didn't comprehend. The opportunity came 2 weeks later. I was in the final stages of courting a new mega-client, a gruff, self-made Texas oil man named Frank Pollard. Pollard was old school, a man who respected grit and handshakes over fancy presentations. He was also, coincidentally, a longtime golfing buddy of my father-in-law, Mr. Abernathy. I arranged a dinner at a private room in a classic Chicago steakhouse. It was to be the final handshake on a 9-figure deal. I invited my core team, Sophia, my head of engineering, and of course my director of aesthetic vision, Julian. I told Julian it was crucial for him to be there to speak to the artistic soul of the project. To Julian's visible surprise, when we arrived, Mr. Abernathy was already there, sharing a laugh with Pollard. "Arthur, my boy," Pollard boomed, his Texan accent filling the room. "And you brought the team? Good, good. I like to see the whole operation." Mr. Abernathy smiled his usual thin, reptilian smile. "Frank, you know Arthur, the boy who can build anything out of nothing." He then gestured towards Julian. "And this must be the new fellow Eleanor is so impressed by. The artist." Julian, caught off guard, shook his hand, looking from my father-in-law to me with a flicker of confusion. The dinner was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Pollard and I talked business, billion-dollar logistics, and the gritty details of construction. Julian was a fish out of water, his talk of negative space and visual dialogue falling flat in a conversation about tons of steel and concrete. He was visibly uncomfortable, a decorative object in a room of functional power. Then, Mr. Abernathy, after his third glass of scotch, delivered the payload. He leaned forward conspiratorially, his voice low but carrying in the quiet room. "You know, Frank," he said, looking at Pollard but intending his words for Julian. "The thing about these self-made men like Arthur here, they're brilliant, absolute workhorses, but they can miss the finer things. A man can build the biggest damn skyscraper in the world, but if his own house isn't in order, what's it all for?" He took a slow sip of his drink. "Thank God for Eleanor. She has the breeding. She knows what's important. Keeps him grounded in what really matters." The subtext was as thick as the cigar smoke. It was a clear statement of ownership. Eleanor was an Abernathy. I was a tool she utilized. And Julian? Julian was a passing amusement. I watched Julian's face. The blood drained from it. In that one moment, he understood. He wasn't Eleanor's co-conspirator. He was her temporary distraction, a piece of entertainment. And he wasn't just sleeping with the wife of some anonymous architect. He was sleeping with the daughter of the powerful, possessive man sitting right across the table. He was trespassing on Abernathy property. I saw real fear in his eyes for the first time. The fear of a man who has wandered into a turf war he didn't know existed and just realized he is on the losing side, with no allies. As the dinner concluded, I shook Frank Pollard's hand, sealing the deal. Mr. Abernathy clapped me on the back, a gesture of feigned camaraderie that felt like a threat. On the ride back, Julian was unervingly silent. The arrogant artist had vanished, replaced by a man who looked like he'd seen a ghost. The seeds of doubt had been planted in Chicago. Tonight, they had taken root in the fertile soil of fear. The structure of their affair was now critically unstable. All it needed was one final decisive blow, and I knew exactly where and when I was going to deliver it. The 15th anniversary of Advanced Designs was more than a milestone. It was a coronation. I had booked the main atrium of the Chicago Museum of Contemporary Art for the occasion, the very institution where the Abernathy Pavilion was causing Julian so much grief. The symbolism was deliberate. It was a space my firm had helped renovate, a public testament to my success, and tonight, it would be the theater for my private war. The atrium was spectacular. Soaring white walls were bathed in strategic uplighting. A string quartet played softly in the background. Champagne flowed from towers of crystal flutes. The elite of Chicago were all there, clients, competitors, city officials, and the media. It was a night to celebrate the empire I had built, and to burn a part of it to the ground. I arrived with Eleanor on my arm. She was breathtaking in a shimmering, silver gown, a perfect portrait of the supportive, elegant wife. But I could feel the tension in the delicate bones of her hand as it rested on my forearm. Her smiles to the guests were bright but brittle. She was an actress in the final scene of a play, uncertain of her lines. She knew something was wrong in her world, the distance from Julian, my own cool, unreadable demeanor, but she couldn't see the full design of the catastrophe bearing down on her. I was preternaturally calm. I moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations, shaking hands, my public face perfectly in place. I was an architect in the final moments before a major reveal. I had checked every calculation. I knew the structure of my plan was sound. Across the room, I spotted Julian. He was lurking near the bar, trying to blend in, nursing a glass of whiskey. He looked haunted. His eyes kept darting towards me, then towards Eleanor, then towards the exit, like a cornered animal searching for an escape route. He and Eleanor exchanged a few furtive, panicked glances, but they were islands in a sea of my success, unable to reach each other. My brother, Marcus, found me near the ice sculpture. He looked out of place in his rented tuxedo, but his presence was a grounding force. "Hell the party, Art," he said, taking a beer from a passing waiter. He looked around the cavernous room. "You gonna do it tonight?" "Tonight," I confirmed, my voice low. "You sure about this?" "It's gonna be a goddamn mushroom cloud." "I know," I said. "Some structures are too rotten to renovate, Marcus. They require demolition, so you can build again on a clean site." He just nodded, clapped me on the shoulder, and said, "Well, give him hell." My father-in-law, Mr. Abernathy, held court in the center of the room, pontificating to a group of bankers. He caught my eye and gave me a smug, proprietary nod, as if this whole evening was merely a reflection of his daughter's good taste in marrying a productive asset. He had no idea he was a load-bearing wall in a structure I was about to collapse. At precisely 9:30 p.m., the director of the museum stepped to the podium to offer her remarks and then introduce me. This was the signal. I discreetly caught the eye of a man standing near the entrance. He was dressed in the crisp, nondescript uniform of a city courier service. He was, in fact, Peterson's most trusted associate. He gave me a barely perceptible nod and began to move purposefully through the crowd, his destination, Mr. Abernathy's table. As the museum director finished her glowing introduction, a ripple of applause went through the room. I straightened my tie, gave Eleanor's hand a final, cold squeeze, and walked towards the stage. I felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on me. Eleanor, Julian, my team, my clients, my enemies. The stage lights were hot and blinding. It was time for the show to begin. I stepped up to the podium, the applause washing over me. I looked out at the sea of faces, a gallery of the powerful and the influential. My gaze swept past them all, briefly locking with Eleanor's, then Julian's. They both looked like defendants awaiting a verdict. "Thank you, Director," I began, my voice steady and clear, amplified by the speakers throughout the grand atrium. 15 years. It's hard to believe. When I started this firm, it was just me, a drafting table, and a belief that a building could be more than just a shelter. It could be a statement, a legacy. I let my eyes roam the room, making contact with old clients, old friends. I see so many people here tonight who took a chance on that belief, who trusted us to build their homes, their headquarters, their dreams. To all of you, thank you. You are the foundation of our success. I paused, taking a sip of water. The room was silent, attentive. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the courier reach Mr. Abernathy's table. But a company isn't just about the projects it completes, I continued, my tone shifting slightly. It's about the people who build it, the visionaries who push the boundaries. In this past year, our vision has been expanded in ways I couldn't have imagined. My eyes found Julian. He flinched as if struck. We brought on a new director of aesthetic vision, a man of singular talent, Mr. Julian Croft. "Julian, would you please stand?" A hesitant, confused smattering of applause broke out. Julian, looking pale and sick, slowly got to his feet. He gave a weak, uncertain wave. Julian has brought a unique intimacy to his work with us, I said, letting the word intimacy hang in the air with deliberate, poisonous weight. He has reminded us all that the most important connections are the ones that happen behind closed doors. The meaning was starting to dawn on a few faces in the crowd. The whispers began. At the same time, the courier placed a thick, legal-sized envelope directly in front of Mr. Abernathy. My father-in-law looked down at it, then up at the courier, then at me on the stage, his smug expression finally dissolving into confusion. And, of course, I went on, my voice hardening, I have to thank the person who has been my partner through all of this. My wife, Eleanor. I extended a hand towards her. Eleanor, please join me on stage. Now the room was buzzing. This was not part of any program. This was something else entirely. Eleanor, trapped by social convention, had no choice. She walked towards the stage as if wading through molasses, her silver dress now looking like a suit of armor that was failing her. I took her hand. It was ice cold. I now had them both on stage with me, my wife and her lover. The room was electric with tension. Mr. Abernathy was now tearing open the envelope. True success, I said, my voice dropping slightly, becoming more personal, more dangerous, is about transparency. It's about having the courage to tear down what is false to make way for what is true. So tonight, in that spirit, I have two final announcements to make. I paused. Every eye was on me. Every phone was now out, recording. First, I said, turning to look directly at Eleanor. As a symbol of my commitment to building a future based on honesty, I want you all to know that I have just filed for divorce. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. Eleanor swayed, her hand flying to her mouth. Across the room, I saw Mr. Abernathy's face crumple as he read the legal papers. The divorce petition, a motion to freeze their joint assets, a full accounting of the credit card charges. It was all there. Before the shock could settle, I turned to Julian. Second, I announced, my voice like steel, my first act, as the sole owner of the next chapter of this firm, is to place Mr. Croft's Abernathy Pavilion project under a full forensic audit, effective immediately, to investigate certain budget irregularities. I looked at his terrified face. However, I'm a reasonable man. I leaned into the microphone. I'm willing to accept Mr. Croft's immediate resignation, tendered before he leaves this building tonight, in which case the audit will be unnecessary. The choice, of course, is his. Checkmate. I hadn't just exposed him. I had given him a choice between public disgrace and financial ruin or silent, utter defeat. I placed the microphone back on the podium with a soft, final thud. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a world breaking. Then, the whispers erupted into a roar of shocked conversation. I turned my back on my wife and her lover, standing frozen in their public humiliation, and walked off the stage. The stage lights fell a little less hot, a little less blinding. The show was over. I descended the steps from the stage into a maelstrom. The air, once filled with polite music and celebratory chatter, was now thick with whispers and the frantic tapping of thumbs on screens. The news was already spreading through the room like a virus. People parted before me as if I were a force of nature, their expressions a mixture of shock, pity, and a certain kind of awed fear. Julian was the first to break. He practically fled the stage, his face ashen, stumbling through the crowd and out the main entrance without a word, a man escaping the rubble of his own ambition. Eleanor remained on stage for a moment longer, a silver statue frozen under the spotlights, before her father, his face a thunderous mask of rage and humiliation, stormed up the steps and guided her away, shielding her from the prying eyes. Their exit was a slow, agonizing procession of defeat. Sophia was the first to reach my side. She didn't offer condolences or congratulations. She simply handed me a glass of whiskey, her eyes filled with a look of fierce, unwavering loyalty. The demolition was successful, Arthur, she said quietly. It was, I replied, the whiskey burning a clean path down my throat. Marcus appeared next, a wide, incredulous grin on his face. He clapped me hard on the back. "Jesus, Art," he said, his voice a low rumble of admiration. "I thought you were just going to serve her papers. You didn't just demolish the building. You salted the earth so nothing could ever grow there again. It was the only way to be sure the foundation was clean," I said, a strange calm settling over me. The rest of the night was a blur of fragmented conversations. Clients steering clear. Competitors watching with undisguised glee. My own team looking at me with a new kind of respect. I had become something more than their boss. I had become a story they would tell for years. Later that night, back in the silent, empty house that was no longer a home, my phone buzzed. It was Eleanor. I let go to voicemail, then a text, then another. I didn't read them. There was nothing left to say. Then a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered. It was Julian. His voice was a pathetic whisper, a ghost of the arrogant man from the boardroom. "Why?" he breathed into the phone. "You could have just fired me." I stood by the vast window, looking out at the city lights. "Because you didn't just sleep with my wife, Julian," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. "You dismissed my life's work as a cage. You stood in the world I built and called me a builder like it was an insult." I paused. "I just want to give you a lesson in architecture. A facade is nothing without a foundation, and yours was built on sand." I hung up before he could reply. The war was over. The noise, the anger, the planning, it all fell away, leaving behind a vast, quiet, and empty space. The question was, what would I build in it now? 6 months can feel like a lifetime. The mushroom cloud from the gala had dissipated, leaving behind a radically altered landscape. Advanced Designs, contrary to the predictions of my competitors, was thriving. The story of that night, which I had expected to be a liability, had paradoxically become an asset. In the cutthroat world of Chicago business, the tale of my calculated, audacious move had imbued me with a reputation for being a man who was not to be trifled with, a man who understood strategy on a level few could comprehend. I had promoted Sophia to Chief Operating Officer, and together we were securing projects bigger than any I had landed before. She was a true partner, and the firm was stronger than ever. The divorce had been finalized with brutal efficiency. Faced with the mountain of evidence and the threat of further public humiliation, the Abernathysts had chosen to cut their losses. Eleanor agreed to my terms, which were financially fair but emotionally absolute. She took her money and her name and retreated back into the gilded cage of her family's estate. The house was sold. Our shared life was liquidated. I heard whispers about her through the grapevine. She and Julian had tried to make a go of it, but their affair, born in the shadows of deceit and fueled by the thrill of the forbidden, couldn't survive the harsh light of day. Without my money to sustain his lifestyle, and with his reputation in the art and design world shredded, Julian had become just another struggling artist. Their romance, it turned out, was just another asset that was now underwater. They imploded within 2 months. One evening, Marcus and I were at a simple neighborhood bar in Bridgeport, the kind of place with old beer signs on the wall and a game on the TV. It was a world away from the steakhouses and museums. He took a long sip of his beer and looked at me, his expression serious. "So, was it worth it, Art? All that drama?" I thought about it for a moment, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. I thought about the pain, the sleepless nights, the cold, methodical planning. It wasn't about the drama, I said finally. And it wasn't even about revenge, not really. It was about taking back the blueprint. I looked at my brother, trying to put into words the core of it. They thought my name was on the company, but that their class, their taste, their judgment, were the real architects of my life. That I was just the hired help building their world. I took a drink. I had to show them who designed the damn thing. I had to show them I owned the plans. It wasn't about destroying her. It was about proving, once and for all, that I am the architect of my own life. Marcus nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "So what's the new plan?" "There is no plan," I said, and for the first time, the thought didn't fill me with anxiety, but with a quiet sense of liberation. Just an empty lot and a clean foundation. A year after the gala, I found myself at an event that was the polar opposite of that night. It wasn't in a grand museum, but in the gymnasium of a community center in a working-class neighborhood. My firm had designed and built a new community library for them, pro bono. We'd used innovative, sustainable materials to create a beautiful, light-filled space on a shoestring budget. It was one of the projects I was most proud of. I wasn't there as a donor to be thanked. I was just there, standing at the back, watching families explore the new space. Kids were curled up in reading nooks. Teenagers were using the new computer terminals. It was a living building filled with purpose. A woman about my age, with intelligent eyes and a warm, no-nonsense smile, came and stood beside me. "You're Arthur Vance, aren't you?" she said. "I am," I replied. "I'm Sarah Jenkins, the head librarian," she said, shaking my hand. Her grip was firm. "I just want to say thank you. You didn't just give us a building. You listened." The acoustic baffling near the children's section, the wheelchair height shelving, those details, they matter. A building is for the people inside it, I said simply. Otherwise, it's just a sculpture. We stood there for a while talking, not about money or status or deals. We talked about books, about the challenge of getting kids to read, about the importance of public spaces. Her passion was infectious, her intelligence unadorned. It was a conversation between equals, two people who cared about building things that serve a community. There were no pretenses, no performances. She didn't know the story of the gala, of Eleanor, of Julian. She just saw me as the man who had helped build her library. And in that moment, I realized the final piece of my own reconstruction had clicked into place. My identity was no longer defined by the woman who had betrayed me, or the father-in-law who had scorned me, or the lover who had underestimated me. I was not the vengeful husband or the corporate shark. I was a builder. But this time, I understood it in a way I never had before. It wasn't an insult. It was my core. It was what I did. I built things that lasted. As I left the library and walked into the cool evening air, I felt a profound sense of peace. The revenge wasn't the explosion at the gala. That was just the demolition. The true victory was this, the quiet that followed. The freedom to stand on a clean, open foundation with a blueprint that was entirely my own, ready to build again.